Well, it's unanimous. On this particular matter, everyone agrees. It's not often that the religious authorities agree with Jesus, but today everyone is on the same page. What is the first and the greatest of all the commandments? The scribe asked Jesus. In other words, what is the most important purpose that we can give our life to? And Jesus, of course, goes on, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, in all your strength. In other words, you must give glory and honour to God from every dimension in your being and through every action that you take. Everything is geared towards the honour and the glory of God. And then he goes on, and you must love your neighbour as yourself. So 2 commandments, but as I'm sure we know, 2 sides of the one coin. St. Augustine, on commenting on this text, he said that the love of God is the first in order, but the love of neighbour is the first in action. Augustine was saying that it's only by loving our neighbour that we can learn to truly see God. And of course, he was drawing from the letter of John. St. John says, if you do not love your neighbour who you see, how will you love God who you do not see? So it's through the love of neighbour, Augustine says, that we learn to see and ultimately love God. Today, I want to focus on 2 words, just 2 words from the second part of the Great Commandment. And the words are, the very last 2 words, as yourself. God says that you're not just to love others, but you're to love others as yourself. And here lies the great challenge. Because if we're really honest with ourselves, I think we'll often recognise that we can find it very difficult to truly love ourselves. And I wonder if this is why God added these last 2 words, to provoke us to recognise how difficult it can be for us at times to love ourselves. And to also recognise how difficult it can be to love anyone else, including God, if we aren't able to first love ourselves. We could say that living out the Great Commandment begins with learning to love ourselves. And of course, not in a narcissistic, self-centered kind of way, but in a way that recognises the goodness of God that is in us. The way that God is at work in us and through us, despite our imperfections, despite our weakness. To love ourselves is to recognise the divine spark that's in us, the way that God has created us and loved us into being. You see, loving God begins by appreciating what God has created in us. Now, one very practical and important way that we can grow in self-love is by practicing self-compassion. And we show compassion towards ourselves in the same way that we would show compassion to someone else. Think of someone you've had compassion for lately. Maybe it's someone who's grieving deeply or someone who's experiencing mental anguish. Maybe someone in some kind of experience of poverty. Maybe you've walked down the street, you notice someone living on the street. Think of someone you've felt compassion for lately. I'm sure the first thing that would have happened is that you noticed. You noticed their situation. You noticed their pain. That's the first step in compassion. And secondly, of course, you were moved by their situation. You were moved by their pain. Compassion comes from a word that means to suffer with. And so when you're feeling compassion, I'm sure at some level you were suffering with that person. You had this experience of empathy, of understanding and acceptance for that person in the midst of their situation. You were with them. It wasn't a pity thing, but you were with them in their suffering, in their circumstance. And then finally, as you were feeling and experiencing this compassion, you probably also would have recognized that what this person was going through was just part of the human experience, that it wasn't necessarily just them, but it's just part of what it means to be human. That sometimes we experience suffering and various circumstances that can really challenge us and make it difficult for us. So that's compassion towards another. Compassion towards the self is the same thing. It's firstly allowing ourselves to notice situations, circumstances that are difficult for us. Maybe it's some kind of pain, or maybe it's you see something going on in you which is less than desirable. And so to be self-compassionate is just to allow yourself to notice that, to recognise that pain, perhaps to move towards parts of us that are a little ugly, that might scare us a little bit. And then secondly, just to be warm and understanding and accepting towards that part of us. To be empathetic towards ourselves. To love ourselves, even in the midst of that particular thing that we're facing. And then finally, is to realise that what I'm experiencing, what I'm suffering, is just part of the human condition. It's not just me. This is kind of something which is common to our humanity, and different people experience in different ways and at different times. There's some really helpful teaching available these days on this practice of self-compassion. I want to encourage you to see it as a practice. It's something that we need to continue to exercise towards ourselves. It's like a muscle we build as we look to ourselves in this kind of way. But one of the things I think the secular experts won't tell you when they talk about this practice of self-compassion is that what is actually happening is that when you're compassionate towards yourself, you're being a conduit to the compassion of God, who of course is the source of all compassion. We see that most beautifully in the heart of Jesus, who reflects to us the compassion of God. You see, self-compassion opens us up to the deep healing work of God. It softens us. It softens us towards ourselves and towards others and towards God. I've found in my own journey that when I practice self-compassion, it makes me much more accepting, much more gentle, and less demanding towards myself. I can guarantee that the more that we practice self-compassion, the more we will be able to love others and ultimately to love God.